Here I have a couple of smaller chargers that I use for different purposes. This one here I use as a travel charger. It's a 60 watt AC powered, so mains powered, figure 8 cable into the back of it, and it's designed to charge up to 4S batteries and can output about 60 watts. So for a 4S that's about 3.8 amps from memory. This one over here is a field charger, so it's DC powered. I can either power it off of the car battery or plug in things like this. This is a 5000 milliamp hour 4S pack, and I've got a number of those, so I can use them to charge my smaller flight packs. And it's DC powered, so it also does 2S up to 6S batteries, and is a 60 watt output, meaning 3.8 odd amps for a 4S battery. Now both of these chargers are really only sold, or originally sold with the cabling to charge one battery at a time, but in both cases when travelling and in the field I'd like to be able to charge more than one battery quite often. So one option would be to buy one of these breadboards pre-made, and it's easy. It'll charge up to 4 batteries at a time and allow you to charge anything from 2S to 6S batteries. This one here has a 6S connector on it, so it will plug in and work with this field charger, but this travel charger that I use only has a 4S output, so this breadboard wouldn't work with this charger anyway unless I modified the cable. So on this one I've actually made up my own. It's a 3-port balance port charging setup, so I've got 3 4S outlets there, and I've made up a XT60 triple outlet here, and I can charge 3 batteries at once with this. So for a 3.6 amps, let's say, that's 1.2 amps per battery when parallel charging, so that's just fine for anything for 1000 milliamp hour up to 1500 milliamp hour batteries. Now I'll go through and show you what I did to make up this balance port outlet. Now both chargers typically come with this type of banana plug connector, female connector, and it'll come with a cable like this, maybe with or without an XT60 connector on it, but traditionally you plug those two into there, your battery lead into here, and then the balance lead into whichever relevant balance port. And similarly on this charger, this one actually has a 2, 3, 4S outlet here, so you can plug 2, 3 or 4S balance leads into there. So what we need to do is convert this setup to be able to charge 3 batteries. So chargers out of the way. So the first thing we need to do is make up a triple XT60 adapter. So I've already made these up. So I've used a male XT60 on here, and that's going to plug into there, and then 3 XT60 females on this side. So whether you want to call them females or males, depending on whether you're referring to the inside pins, now these 3 are wired in parallel. So I'll just try, I think on this one I can pull back the heat shrink. So it's a bit messy, but all of the negative terminals are wired into the negative side of here, so they're all common, and on this side all of the positive are connected together and soldered to the positive outlet on there. So they all receive, there's my charger beeping, something's finished charging on the main charger now, but so that will allow me to plug 3 of the main battery connectors in at once, and all I did was glued these together to start with, sandwich them together, and then I've soldered it up and then put some heat shrink over the top. I'll probably poke some hot glue in there to stop this coming off in future. So you can also make up doubles if you like, so that's a little double connector, in which case I've just soldered them directly, the terminals directly. I didn't put a piece of wire in between them. Let's go through the parts we need to make up one of these. So it consists of a piece of solderable breadboard or stripboard. It comes in a larger piece or a small sheet. There's a larger piece there, and you just score it and mark it and then break it how you need it, and it has a copper trace that runs across it with holes spaced about 2.54 millimeters, I think, across it from memory, and so we need a piece of that. It's available from electronics hobby shops and so forth. Not sure where it would be available online, but I'm sure somebody would sell it. Just search for solderable breadboard or stripboard. Then we need some JST-XH connectors. So these are, well, whether you want to refer to them as female because of the outer or male because of the inner, but these are the ends that the battery plugs into. So battery has this connector on it, and that'll plug in like so. So I need 3 of this type, and one of the male type, the type that matches what's on the batteries. And these are available, I bought these from HobbyKing or Banggood actually, and they come in a pack of 5 male, 5 female, and these are the bits that go on the ends of the wire into the end of this one. We'll call it the male connector. So need a selection of those, 3 of that type or end, female I'll call it, and 1 of the male. Need some heat shrink. This is just going to go around the outside here. This particular size is 16 millimeter. That's I think the diameter of it when it's open like that. And some wire. So I've used on this one some 24 gauge wire, red for all the positive lines and black for the negative line. But these connectors have a key on them and a key slot on the other side, so they can only go together one way. So the colour of the wires isn't really that important. So for this next one I'm actually going to use some of this wire. It's just left over from where I've cut motor wires down to length, and it's a mix of 22 and 24 gauge I think, and that's sufficient for the job. They're all the bits that we need. First thing I'm going to do is prepare the male plug end, which has the wires going into it. So I've taken my 5 wires here, 1 for each port, and what I'm going to do is strip them, the ends of them, just probably 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters. If they're soldered on the end, I chop it off, and you can either do it using a pair of pliers like this, or just use a hobby knife to carefully roll it around the end and remove that small end piece. Okay, now I'll take these terminal ends, cut them off their strip. Now to crimp the terminals here on the ends of the wires, we can either use the top of the line ratchet type crimper, this plier type, and has the different sizes in the end there, or even a pair of pointy nose pliers. That's how I used to do it. Now, and I'll do a couple each different way, but place the wire into the retainer there, and what I do is just carefully, using just my fingernails, fold over the end. So there's actually 2 lots of tabs that get folded over. The first lot, the larger, longer tabs, I'll try and point out, on this end, crimp down on the sheath, and the inner ones crimp down on the actual wire. And once you get this around the right way, Here we go there. That's one. So easiest to do all of these first, and that way you don't have to worry about the rotation of the wire. If you solder the other end, then it's really, you end up with getting twists in your wire. So go through and do the rest of these. Use pointy nose pliers. I start by crimping the piece over the wire first. That's the inside part, and then I'll crimp around the sheath. This is where it's not ideal, but it is possible to make it work. There we go. That's our 5 wires done. Now we can poke them into the receptacles or into the holes. And they're designed to go one way. They've got a little barb on the back side there, and that ends up in line with the slot on this side. So when they're in there, they should stay in there. So a little barb on this side goes into the slot there. There you have it. The wires are in there and the plug is now prepared. Now to prepare the piece of breadboard. This needs to have 5 lines in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got a little half a line on each side where I scored it through the holes to break it, but I need to have 5 clean trace lines of copper on there. And what I'll do is, this one is also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 odd holes long, and so that I can space these connectors so they're not butted up against each other. Have a little gap of 5 to 8 millimeters between them. So I'll just wipe this all down with a flux pen. This is optional, but I find the solder works better. So it's important that you don't drag the solder across from one trace to another when you're doing this. Now we're going to position these in their relevant places so they go through from the other side. It doesn't matter which way around the key slot is, but I prefer to have them all, whichever way you choose, that they're all the same way. So I'll make it the same as my other one, the key slot facing out the end at the start. I'm going to drop these into the end holes and then work out the middle hole for this one, and that would be there. So now I've got an even gap between each of the 3 ports. I'll flip that over. The copper trace is on this side where I'll be soldering, and now I'll proceed to solder each of them up. I've got 5 pins on each one, so there's 15 solder. There we go, and on this end, pick an end, doesn't matter, but on this end I'm going to add a little bit of extra solder where I'm going to connect the wires on. So extend that solder out to the end of it. And final check is to make sure that you haven't bridged any of the traces. That will be a short circuit and will be detrimental for your charger and probably your batteries. So that's the breadboard now prepared. Decide on a wire length. I'm going to make this one quite a bit shorter than the other one doesn't really need to be that long. A piece of heat shrink can come in handy here to keep the wires neat and tidy and help me judge the length to cut them. So I'll put that over. So I'm just going to cut this up here now. I've cut these down to length after putting the heat shrink on there. Now I need to make sure that I align the right wire with the right point on here. So what I'll do beforehand though is trim the end of the sheath off just 1 to 2 millimeters and pre-tin the ends of these wires. Only need 1–1.5 millimeters or so sticking out the end, and they're now all pre-tinned and they're all the same length. Now the heat shrink that I'm using, I'm going to cut this into a couple of pieces to make it more flexible around the, or to make the cable more flexible. So I'm just going to cut 3 small pieces of this off. And slide these over the end of the cable. Now it's important that each wire goes from the right terminal at this end to the right solder point at the other end. So the easiest way is to plug this in to one of the connectors, the one on the end where you'll be soldering, in this case here for me, and once that's plugged in, now I can loop the wire coming out of this port all the way around to the solder point closest to the end here. To work out which wire, I just need to pull down on it, and it'll be the short one. There it is there. Now I can loop that around and solder it on. It's going to be easiest to disconnect the plug, solder that to the relevant point. Once again ensuring there's no bridge between the copper traces, and then repeat for the next few wires. Okay, that's the soldering complete. Now to check that it's all being connected and wired properly, I'm going to take a multimeter on continuity mode, so this will beep when I get continuity. And what I'm first of all going to do is hold, well in this case the black, on the first trace and then touch the red on all the others. And do this, move the black along to the next one and check. And by doing that I'm checking that I haven't accidentally soldered a bridge between the two traces. So I'm basically checking between every trace and every other trace. Then I want to make sure that my wires are coming into the right port. So this is where I need to make sure that this end with this key aligns with this pin here. So it's where we can put the multimeter. Bit tricky here, but it might be easier if I let this spin over. So basically now I'm going to be swapping sides. So this one here, in this case, should go to there. Yes. And there we go. So that's all correct. So now I'll twist this plug around and put it back in. Basically these wires, all 5 of them, are looping back to the same point on the board. Final step here is the heat shrink. So Now take the larger piece of heat shrink, this just fits over the top. And it's a little bit long, but that's all right, I'll trim it afterwards. So now that it's over the top, I'm going to Now this piece of heat shrink is important because we want to make sure that there's no chance that those little terminals underneath could short out on something if you put it down on a metal object when you're charging. So, but obviously we can't use it yet until we cut out the holes for the ports. There you have it, one complete balance port charge adapter to allow parallel charging of up to 3 4S batteries. Now check the description for a link to a video on parallel charging fundamentals if you haven't already seen it.